Welcome back to Chris and Retro. Tonight's video is going to be on communication. You know, communication is so important in our everyday lives, is important in many aspects of human living for sure. And how effectively we handle communication can determine our outcomes, either being poor or successful. We have everything from degrees in communications. Basic. I had a, and when I have 2 degrees, an associate's degree, which is when I wasn't sure what I want to do in my life, and then a bachelor's degree when I got more clarity. But my associate's degree was emphasizing broadcast communications. I found a love for writing from a very young age. So communication through my pen and through my voice are things that I enjoy. So we have degrees in communication that can help us be more effective. And all the way through to teams of communication teams that help corporations, emphasize the message that they want to get out about their services or goods. It can be used as a weapon. It can be used as detrimentally. It can be used as a benefit in terms of accomplishing our goals. And tonight's video, what I want to do is just get into some elements of communication, hopefully provide you some thoughts that might help you improve yours. Communication is a huge part of our lives. You think about just everyday life. I mean, we're a 30-second YouTube communication. We're a 30-second, less than 30-second world that we live in. I'm actually, what's the name of the book? Hook Point. Hook Point's a book. I got over here. I was looking at my bookshelf. Hook Point's a book that talks about how some social media programs recognize people only have about a 3-second attention span. Back when they were charging millions and millions of dollars for 30-second spots in the Super Bowl, 30 seconds was going to do it. And that was only a few years ago. And now we're down to 3 seconds. So that can be challenging for content creators like myself, but it's also something for us to recognize how important communication can be and how limited our attention span is. Have a cell service go down and watch how handicapped you are if your cell service isn't working, or if you can't get service, how out of touch you feel and isolated you feel, or God forbid your internet service go down. You've got a house full of kids or teenagers. They're lost. You thought you threw them in the middle of the desert. In relationships, communications are infinitely important in terms of the words you say, and also recognizing how your partner receives them. We think of war communication is key. In terms of where you're in the middle of a fight, but also what's happening in terms of getting there or planning for it and everything else. Communication is critical. I actually have a friend of mine I went to high school with. He's a Marine, and he was at the Black Hawk Down scene and was comms for Black Hawk Down, and he's got a unique perspective on that whole scene. But communication was very important because everything had basically gone sideways. We had a helicopter down in the middle of the enemy territory, and they were willing to desecrate basically the dead. And so communication in terms of getting those soldiers and their remains out of that territory was very important. But tonight's, I'm going to really focus probably primarily on communication and relationships, especially as you're going through trying times and things like that. Now, there really are 2 ways to look at this, at least from my perspective in the context of this video. I'm going to look at, what effective communication sometimes looks like, as well as bad or ineffective communication can be. I'll start with some of the examples where things can go wrong. We look at in relationships, how we talk, or our lack of communication relationships, and what that does for us. In a relationship, if I'm with somebody, I'm trying to make this thing work, and they're somebody that really needs to express it through conversation. I'm just not somebody who wants to deal with it. I'm like, get over it. Boy, that's not going to go very far. Sam and I, we have a challenge in the fact that I communicate with my mouth, and she doesn't feel like she can meet force with that, so to speak. So if we're having a hard time, I'm going to be very verbose, and she's going to shut down in that. Whereas she's one that will then come back, and I'm going to get, a litany of text messages if I've offended her in some way. And those text messages, I can't keep up. I don't type that fast on text, and she'll be, 7 stages into this argument, and I'm still responding on stage one. So understanding how to effectively communicate in a way where you guys can meet in the middle with whomever you're speaking with, and come to some kind of an objective. And ultimately what we're talking about in the end here is going to be outcomes, not necessarily what's good or bad, or in terms of, I'm not sorry, we are going to talk about what's good or bad, what necessarily works for everybody. I'm not going to get there, but we will talk about, focus on the objective and your outcome. I apologize, there seems to be a little bit of a lag in the video tonight, so if it comes up, I'll just keep plowing forward and hopefully the freeze video stops. Medical professions, if we have you'll find this a lot in addiction. Communication between multiple constituents is really, really important, because you're really, as I've talked about in other videos that were a little bit more fiery, medical facilities are operating as medical facilities, even though they're non-medical facilities. So and the way that addiction is, that whole population, that whole treatment program has grown, is that if somebody's coming into a treatment facility, oftentimes that's the first real medical interaction they've had. So there's a lot of referrals out, for dentists and medical doctors, and along with your mental health, and along with your substance use disorder, and along with your housing, and along with what you need to do to take care of your kids. I mean, there's just so much communication there. And if that breaks down, and people decide not to, or don't have systems to handle it, or the systems are incompatible with the other agencies, or there's no follow-up, there's a lot of things that can go bad with that. Work is huge, and it's one of the challenges we have in our business. I work for a distributor in the federal research space, and we represent we have contracts over 300 suppliers and several million products that we sell with every federal agency that the U.S. opens up that does research. And so there's communication is infinitely important there, especially in a highly contractually obligated environment. If you're not communicating correctly, or if you're communicating wrong, it's really easy to commit fraud. So communication, or at the very least, being effective with your customers' needs. And in my business, sales, not win, not make your business grow, that type of thing. So communication is incredibly important. And probably one of the things we spend most of the time working on is becoming more effective in how we communicate, and making sure the vehicles that we have to communicate are working. And again, are being received by the people that we're trying to communicate with in a way that's effective. Friends and family, man, family. Family is one of those things where communication, you have to figure it out. They're with you for life. So you have to figure that one out. So I think I joked either Thanksgiving or Christmas or one of the holidays, you go to a family gathering and not everybody is doing okay. It's not everybody's getting along, and communication there, and even managing things where you've just agreed that you're not going to get along, is important, so that everybody in the room is not crushed. And then, the legal matters. I had a recent experience where we were in a court setting, and I'm representing myself in this court setting in a family matter, and the the one attorney had said something that honestly just really pissed me off. And when I get pissed, my cadence goes up. So I was trying to explain something when this person spoke up, and I was like, "That's not right." And it was basically, this person had been fed false information, like complete false information, and it's since been proven otherwise. And they probably should have done more due diligence before they got to that point of speaking up. But it is what it is. But in that moment, my communication rate sped up. So I'm a fast talker anyway. And so now you put me in a situation where you catch me off guard with bullshit, then I'm going to probably start speaking faster. And that's exactly what happened in that situation. I was told by the judge to slow down. I tried, thought I did. I hadn't. They told me to slow down again. I still didn't. So she wasn't happy with me. But communication, that example, that was bad. But even in terms of how we deliver it, so how is it being received? My message was on point. I wasn't saying anything offensive at all. I wasn't antagonistic. I was literally just going through some facts and information to share. But I was internally furious. So externally, my rate of the way I was delivering my message was not effective. So those are examples of where we can really get sideways in terms of how we send something, and how it's received is really important. And it has nuance depending on where it's applied. And I've given a few examples. Where I've found effective communication, where does it actually work? Well, I've got a few things in my notes here, but and there's probably many more. But to be effective with your communication, one of those things you have to do is be reliable. What do I mean by that? Well, you have to be somebody that they know is going to come to you, that when you're delivering a message, You've established credibility because you're coming with facts. You're not coming with a hustle. You're not winging it. Or you're coming at it from an authentic perspective. So from a work standpoint, credibility is built based on accuracy and timeliness. From an interpersonal relationship, it comes from consistency and authenticity and loyalty, from a well-meaning intent. And then from, constantly finding a way to massage things to get it to a place where your good intention and your noble desire is received in a way with words that people can hear. Um, I'm trying to think what it was. Oh, so I was speaking with a counselor at one point about some things I'm doing with the show and a notion I have in the book. And one of those things I've mentioned on here a bunch of times is, the important part about making promises is that you've actually put your toe in the line and said, I will do this. And then you have to keep that to build your credibility. So if you're making promises and keeping them, and then you make promises and you keep them, and you make more promises, you keep keeping them, all of a sudden you become somebody tremendously reliable. That message sounds great to me, but apparently by telling somebody to be successful that they have to make a promise, the word promise a lot of times denotes that if they don't keep the promise, they're an utter failure, and that can cause certain people problems. So that's just an example of where the words we use, even though they're well intended, you have to make sure that you test and recognize that they may not always be received the way that you want them to. That reliability of always being present for the conversation and recognizing that you're going to have, as they say, the balls to step up and have a conversation. Now, as men, we screw up here, because what we do is we will, the only time that we figure that having the brass tacks or the balls to actually do that is when we're in a combat situation. So if I'm going to tell you what's up and I'm going to make sure you understand where I stand, because I'm not playing with you, that's not the only place that you have to have the balls. Sometimes it's really hard to deliver a tough message to somebody that you really don't want to hurt. And the worst thing you can do is come in all wound up and saying it with your chest. Sometimes you've got to just kind of back it off a little bit, but also be reliable enough to know that person can trust that when you come to them with a message, it's always coming from the same place, well-intended, with the notion of a good objective, or an objective that's mutually beneficial, or in some cases, where that can get difficult is when their timelines are different for the two parties involved. And I'll somewhat explain what I mean by that. Um, communication is strong if there's a goal around it. Now, not everything has to have, okay, I'm going to do this by, January 15th, 2025 at 4 p.m. It doesn't always have to be that. Now, in business, it probably should be a lot of times that way. But in interpersonal relationships, we don't always have these check marks or key performance indicators that we want to note on a piece of paper and make it so impersonal it becomes a math problem. However, an expected goal would be, if let's just say that, let's say that I'm not getting stuff done routinely and I'm not helping out somebody that I've said I would help out. And I'm not consistently delivering, or I have other priorities that I always seem to push that aside. That person's going to seem like they're going to feel like they're not that important. That's communicating to them just by my non follow through that they don't matter, and I'm not really committed to them. And so with that, I've automatically lost credibility in a lot of ways, and their desire to even deal with me. So expected goals are really just saying, look, the outcome is whatever. And let's just say that you're a boss with an employee, and the outcome is that this employee improves their performance. And you give a very straight and candid conversation, but you also have been the person that's talked to them all along about high performance as well, and given them options to be high performing. But let's just say they've gotten to a place for whatever reason, any number of reasons, intended or otherwise, that they're not performing. You also have to have those conversations as well. And they really shouldn't change in their rigor or the venom. It really should be the same type of conversation. Hey, we've had this agreement. This is what should have been done. It's not being done. And what are we going to do to fix it? Again, the objective. What are we going to do to fix it? Or in some cases, I've had to do recently, let them know that it doesn't seem to be working out. We've given a lot of shots, but it's time to go. And I've had, unfortunately, a few of those conversations recently. A big piece about communication that we miss, and then I think this does probably cut across all the examples I've given so far, and perhaps maybe an example you're thinking of, and that is calibration. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean with calibration this. Test it, see if it's going okay. So how are we doing? How was that commitment I made to you, or how did that objective work out for you? Don't just get through the conversation. So I promise I'll never do that again. Even if you don't do whatever that was again, you might want to test and say, how are you feeling about things? Am I doing enough to show you that I'm not going to do that again? Those are things I think that start to build the health and meat around what your original promise was, or your original commitment was, or statement, whatever way you feel comfortable hearing that you are testing it to say, look, I cared enough to make the comment, and I'm also caring enough to make sure that I'm performing to what I told you I was going to do. Those are things that really galvanize a relationship personally, but they also galvanize other communication areas that you're involved in. You know, we the in the end, what we're trying to accomplish is something that when you're communicating, you're coming to an objective. You're not just constantly blowing up or constantly just brushing stuff off, or disengaging, or over engaging, or sharing too much information, which I have a tendency to do. I believe in being authentic and being the same Chris everywhere. But in doing that, I have a tendency to overshare, and not everybody feels comfortable doing that themselves. So they have a hard time receiving it when I do it. So I got to be real careful about that. But the outcomes, really what you're looking for, in a negative interaction, they can be tremendously hurtful outcomes by the way we communicate. They can add stress, resentments, fear, permanent damage to relationships. In a business setting, you can lose customers. In a military setting, you can lose lives. Um, in a cell service internet example I gave, you can lose productivity or have a bunch of crazy kids in the house because they don't know what to do with their lives now. They don't have a device. There are negatives that come from communication that are absolutely, in some cases, very detrimental. The medical example I gave you, if we're not giving appropriate referrals, or the follow-up's not coming through. In addiction, somebody could overdose and die, especially early on when they're really struggling. Positive outcomes, though, are the accomplishment of goals and additional credibility. Galvanized relationship. I use that word already, but it's a word that really means something to me in this. When you're thinking about your interpersonal relationships, how you communicate is probably one of the most critical ways that you can make sure that you are almost bulletproof as you go forward through whatever next trial that you'll inevitably face. I think that no matter what it is that you're trying to accomplish in your life, and regardless if it's professional, tactical, or interpersonal, communication is key to your success. Without effective communication, and not just any communication, because if you're just popping off all the time, it's not doing squat. Or if you're a liar, truth telling is massively important. But if you're lying just to get through a circumstance, oh, no, I never did that. Or, oh, I promise I'll do this, with no intention of doing it, or knowing full well you did it, inevitably you're going to get caught anyway. So why not just come clean now? But that effective communication, no matter what it is key to at least more successful outcomes than it would be if you did not have effective communication. We can stumble through life, and there are going to be times where we can see success happen in moderate manners, or even sometimes in great success. I would imagine there's probably an example that you might be thinking of, or that I might have seen, where terrible communication still led to a good result. That can happen. But I would argue that the vast majority of the time, your improved and effective communication coming from the right place in the first place leads to far more success than it would be if that's absent. I'm hoping tonight that maybe some of this stuff is relatable to you. Perhaps that you're running into situations where you got a relationship's in trouble, or your job's not working out real well. Kind of pause for a minute and recognize, how are you communicating? I'll give you one more example relative to the work environment. One of the challenges that we have is that a lot of emails are sent around. We have this thing called a telephone. I've got a couple right here. This is my work one right here. My other one's somewhere here. We have this phone. Pick it up. Call somebody. That's much more effective than getting email. I get thousands of emails a day at work. It's just, honestly, some days I'm like, why are you even bothering me sending me an email? I've got a policy for my team that if you've got something super urgent, we've got inter-office messaging, send it to me there, send me a text or send that message, and I'll see that because it stands out. But if you've got a circumstance that's a little bit nuanced, don't just do War and Peace in an email and expect somebody's going to go through that and read it and just dump it over the wall and then run away. We do that so much in business, and we do that a lot in our interpersonal life as well. I think that even in the way that we craft our messages, we don't have to put everything into a message necessarily to have that convey things. In fact, most of the time I find that people write really, really long messages to me. They're usually covering their ass. They're not necessarily trying to convey information for me to make a better decision. They're making sure that I told you this if something goes wrong. If you're trying to be an objective-based communicator, if you're focused with the end in mind, if you're trying to have a call to action, only include the information that is going to be a call to action, and include it in a way that the receiver of the information is going to understand what you're asking for. That in a professional environment, that's massively important. Interpersonally, it's often critical. Guys, I've failed so many times with communication, it's unbelievable. I just recently did in court because I spoke too fast. But we overcome those circumstances, and what you should do is audit yourself or inventory yourself and say, okay, where am I not really getting my point across? I do it all the time on a YouTube channel. I'll tell you that. When you see it not growing, you don't see a lot of comments and response. You're just like, man, maybe I'm just a big dud, or maybe the subject matter I have is not really beneficial to somebody. My objective here is to change the life of one, and hopefully, many, but one is most important to me. So with that, I'll just keep going forward, and hopefully one finds what I share beneficial. And some have demonstrated that already, so I keep going forward. If you're struggling with your communication, pause, do that inventory. Take a look at where you're successful and where you're not. And in that place, start to make some tweaks, start to course correct. Even if you think you're successful and you're getting some outcomes, maybe there's a way to be a higher performer in communication. I think the biggest thing is it should generally have a call to action. We shouldn't be just, especially in professional and business, we shouldn't be just chit chatting. We really should communicate with an end in mind, and not the cover your ass communications don't work interpersonally, and they certainly don't work professionally. We see an awful lot of that in the media. We see how far that's going. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. I hope that's communicated clear. I need to have you guys liking and subscribing to the channel. I'd love to keep this thing growing. YouTube loves to help those that help themselves, and one of the ways we can help each other on this channel is to make sure that I'm getting the likes, subscribes, and comments. But guys, I'm thankful for you guys. Hopefully this communication message is something that's going to be beneficial to you in your life, interpersonally or professionally, or in any area as you're evaluating how things are said to you. Between now and the next time we talk, I'm going to do every single thing I can do to stay out of trouble. I hope you do too.